Good morning and welcome to this special coverage. A critical moment in the U.S.-Iran standoff is unfolding, with diplomacy and tension moving in parallel. U.S. President Donald Trump and his national security team are reviewing a new Iranian peace proposal, one that could halt the war and reopen the Strait of Hormuz, while leaving the sensitive nuclear file for later talks. At the same time, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is in St. Petersburg holding high-level talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, signaling that Moscow may play an increasingly central role as Tehran weighs a U.S. request to restart negotiations. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, Israel and Hezbollah continue to exchange fire, with casualties rising, fueling fears of a wider regional escalation despite a fragile ceasefire. So, are we on the brink of a diplomatic breakthrough or edging closer to a broader conflict? I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Stay with us as we break down the latest developments. Iran has asserted its sovereignty at the United Nations as new proposals to end the war face uncertainty. Tehran's UN envoy said that Iran is not bound by certain maritime conventions, reinforcing its stance on the Strait of Hormuz. The comments came as U.S. President Donald Trump discussed a new Iranian proposal with top advisors. The plan reportedly delays nuclear talks until the war ends, a position Washington has rejected, insisting that the nuclear issue must be addressed from the outset.
Recognized as customary international law. It is regrettable that some members, by asserting the navigational rights must not be threatened, deliberately ignore the United States imposition.
The United States and France have exchanged sharp criticism at the United Nations over Iran and the war's legality. U.S. Ambassador Mike Waltz accused Iran of violating international law by laying mines in key waterways, calling the move a threat to global shipping.
Des groupes terroristes. Mais le régime iranien porte une responsabilité écrasante dans cette situation du fait de son obstination coupable à se doter des...
Meanwhile, France said that Iran must make major concessions to reach a lasting solution to the crisis. Speaking at the UN Security Council, Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot called for a fundamental shift in Iran's approach, saying that any durable agreement depends on meaningful compromise. He stressed the need for peaceful coexistence in the region and for creating conditions that allow the Iranian people to build their future. To further understand this complex situation, we're joined from Cairo by Dr. Nurhan Sheikh, Professor of Political Science, and Dr. Muhammad Osman, International Relations Specialist. Welcome to Q News. I would like to start with you, Dr. Sheikh. Now, Iran is offering to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but only if the U.S. lifts its blockade first. So how would this trade-off work in practice? And could Washington realistically agree to it?
I think it's possible to be agreed upon that, but it depends upon what else would Iran introduce. I mean, how much or how far Iran can satisfy some of the United States ambitions either in Hormuz Strait or in the oil and the gas reserves in Iran. If they reached a deal, maybe not declared deal, maybe it is not that open or that declared to media, but if they reach some understanding, the offer of Iran to Mr. Trump concerning business, concerning having what we're talking about, a common company to control and to administrate Strait of Hormuz, I think that may help to facilitate reaching an agreement. But concerning the current situation, I think it is so difficult because the gap is still very wide, and both sides stuck to their demands, which actually contradict to each other.
Yes. Parallel to Iran's offer, Dr. Osman, now US President Donald Trump is reviewing Tehran's latest proposal. So, what factors are likely to shape his decision now?
Thank you for having me, Hala.
It's a
Greetings to you,
pleasure.
your dear guest, and our dear audience as well.
Thank you.
To be honest, Hala, I find it very hard for the United States to accept the Iranian offer as if we assume that these leaks from Axios and New York Times and others are in fact accurate or completely correct in all of their details, because it basically takes the nuclear file of the table and conditions the opening of the Strait of Hormuz to the a prolonged ceasefire or the ending of the war.
And the
And
nuclear file is the pretext of the war in the first place, Doctor, right?
exactly, like this entire war of aggression, I would add, was predicated on the idea that Iran was not being compliant with its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and also wasn't cooperating with the IEA, and that its nuclear program was posed some sort of danger to U.S. national security one way or the other. This was basically the main motivation behind the war.
Yes.
So basically, taking this issue off the table will be tantamount to the United States declaring its own defeat in this war, which I find highly unlikely. The New York Times says that there are certain differences of opinion inside the U.S. administration at the moment, with the more hawkish side saying that the U.S. should not accept this deal, and that the U.S. should continue its blockade on Iran, which would lead to, in a couple of months, it could lead to very, very significant damage to Iran's oil industry and economy. Of course, since it's a rentier economy that is heavily reliant on fossil energy exports. And on the other hand, there are others, more dovish members of the administration, who are trying to urge Trump to accept this deal and embark upon a very long process of negotiations over the nuclear deal, while basically reopening the straits and lifting the blockade, which basically means this entire war would be for nothing, and they would be back to the negotiating tables on the same terms that were there before the war. So the more hawkish side says that the U.S. should not really surrender its leverage. President Trump, according to Axios, is leaning more towards the hawkish side, understandably, of course. However, we can never anticipate what President Trump will do or decide, but I believe that it will be very hard for the United States to swallow the Iranian proposal, and therefore I believe in the future we might see a frozen phase of the conflict, where the United States freezes and manages this conflict through imposing the blockade without attempting to escalate into an open conflict, and there will be this game of patience and attrition between both sides. Iran beckoned that
Yes.
the closure of Hormuz, or the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz, and its impact on the international economy and the energy markets will pressure the United States to back down, while the U.S. also will place its bets on an economic catastrophe inside Iran, which will push Iran to be more flexible on the negotiating table. However, Hal, I also cannot outrule that the United States might carry out another surprise attack on Iran in the next few days or weeks, even, thus resuming the war and attempting to achieve in a second round of fighting what they could not achieve militarily in the first round.
Yes. Dr. Sheikh, now Iran is pushing to delay the nuclear discussions. What is the strategic advantage for Tehran in separating the war track from the nuclear track right now?
I think the Iranian were a little bit smart in that. I mean, if we remember what was early the US and Israel demand, a very important or core demand was to suspend and eliminate or dismantle the whole nuclear program of Iran. But actually now it is maybe the second or third. I mean, the main issue we all talk about is Hormuz, Strait of Hormuz. And I think your Iranians create the card of Hormuz to attract to all attention of the United States, of the whole world, to Hormuz, not to the nuclear program. I think they are trying to gain some time. They also trying to minimize the American demands. They don't want to total dismantle for the program, but they may suspend it, they may freeze it for some time, and maybe also they accept to have the current percentage of enrichment of uranium, which is not bad. It is 60%. This is not satisfied for the United States, but they are maneuver in that. What Washington asked to move all enrichment uranium to United States, that also not acceptable for Iranians. So they are trying to give some alternative. One of them is to Iran itself to liquidate or to decrease what the enrichment uranium to 20%, which was proposed in Vienna agreement 2015. So they are maneuvering over that, and there are a lot of details because it's a technical and political issue in the same time. But I think they are gaining time, and they are trying to minimize what United States ask and to decrease what they can gain from that all.
Yes. Dr. Osman, now, in your own point of view, is the US willing to risk delaying the nuclear talks, which is the reason for the war, as we mentioned, in order to keep diplomacy with Tehran alive?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think so, Hal. I wouldn't say that it's a given that they wouldn't, but I do not believe that they will be willing to go that far to maintain the diplomatic track on the expense of the credibility and the integrity and the image of the United States as a superpower. As I
Yes.
told you, Hal,
Yes.
if they take the nuclear issue off the table, and by the way, I really hope they do, because we need a way out of this that is fast, so that the world would not suffer
Definitely.
way more than it did. However, realistically speaking, and you know that I always like to be a realist in my
Yes, we know you
assumptions
as a
and
very
judgments.
realistic analyst, Dr. Osman. Yes.
I do not see a way that the United States can accept this without accepting a strategic defeat at the same time, and therefore
It
I
would
find it
shatter its image of the superpower hero who's trying to save the world from Iran's nuclear ambitions, right? That
utterly.
would destroy the entire image.
I completely agree with you, and therefore they might be, as Professor Nurhan said, they might attempt to be more flexible on their terms for a nuclear deal. They will try to do that, trying to make their conditions for the settlement less stringent
Yes.
than they were. However, taking the entire nuclear issue off the table and postponing it to a later
Perhaps
time.
they would just set it aside for the moment and then discuss it later. That would be an option, in your own
Yes,
opinion.
this in itself will be an admission of defeat because
Yes.
it was being discussed under the same conditions before the war. So
Yes.
why wage the war then? That makes the entire war pointless. It will also be tantamount to political suicide for whatever is left of the credibility of the Trump administration and this Republican administration as well, which is approaching a midterm election up in November. So if this war ends in a failure, it will be multidimensional. Domestically, it will be a disaster for the Trump administration, and internationally, it will be a disaster for the United States as a superpower. Now, other countries will challenge the supremacy and the hegemony of the United States openly if Iran succeeds in getting away with its nuclear program, despite it being subjected to these waves of massive bombardment and the blockade and hundreds of billions in economic losses and infrastructure damage and thousands dead and the destruction of a huge part of their military infrastructure. Yet, if they persevere and they impose their will on the United States, this will be a political victory, whether we like it or not, for the Iranians.
Mhm.
If Trump gives this away, it will basically define his legacy and his presidency, and he will be the president who started undoing the United States' status as a global hegemon. This is something I do not believe. Not only wouldn't Trump accept this, I do not believe that even the U.S. deep state or
Yes.
even the other members of the administration who are more anti-war, or even the Democratic opposition. I do not believe that anyone who is looking out for the interest of the United States as a U.S. statesman or woman for the interests of the United States as a global power will agree to something like this. Maybe his political opponents will hope that he will agree to something like this so that they can ravage him over it. However, everyone knows that this will not be in the strategic interest of the United States. And I believe, by the way, that the Iranians know this. The Iranians are trying to exact maximum pressure on the Americans so that they would get the best outcomes. I believe they are much more realistic negotiators, by the way, than the Americans are. This has been proven over the past few weeks. But at the same time, this deal or this proposal, Hala, reflects that there are divisions and severe differences within the Iranian regime itself. It seems that the supreme leader is not running the day-to-day affairs due to his health condition, and that different proponents of the regime have autonomy in decision making. And of
Mhm.
course, the strongest proponent or component of the regime is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, a bunch of hardliners, and it has been reported that they are the ones who are obstructing the Iranian side from giving any significant concessions with regards to the nuclear file to the United States, while the politicians and the negotiators, even led by Bakr Kalibaf, a very well-known hardliner, by the way, and a former IRGC general, and he's the Speaker of Parliament and was one of the very close confidants of the former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, yet but he's a pragmatist and he wants to reach a deal. The IRGC would not let him reach a deal, it
Mhm.
seems, and it seems that they have the upper hand. And, and,
Interesting
and,
information.
and
Yes.
of course, Trump's rhetoric, Hala, my final sentence, Trump's rhetoric and the way he speaks about the negotiations, I think, undermines them all the time and embarrasses the Iranian negotiators and makes them unable to market the idea of giving any concessions to their domestic constituency, especially the Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
Okay. Dr. Sheikh, now Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has held high-level talks in St. Petersburg with Russian President Vladimir Putin and also the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. How might these meetings shift Washington's calculations?
Russia exists since early beginning of the conflict, maybe before. So it is nothing completely new. I mean, Russia, a main partner to Iran, it expressed many times its support to Iran against what is going on. It also introduced its proposal for mediation between Iran and the United States, calling for peace and stability in the Gulf, etc. So, but maybe his visit is important because we are talking now on other issues, not the war itself, but and the negotiation itself, but how Iran can accommodate or can adapt with such a situation for a long time. So they are trying to arrange the Iranian matters and having alternatives in everything. Among them, the oil and Iranian oil, how and where it can goes or can go. So I think this is very important right now, how to accommodate for long time conflict or how they can overcome such quarantine of the United States to their ports and to their oil, plus the uranium issues, because Iran also tried to discuss many alternatives to its uranium enrichment reserve. One of them, it can itself deal with it, but other alternative is to move to Russia, because Russia proposed that many times that the Iranian stock of uranium can be safely and completely available for Iran if needed in Russia. So this is also one of the matters to facilitate the negotiation and also to help Iran adapt with the situation, because of course that the Iranian oil is very important to main close friends or close allies and partners to Russia, Iran from one side and China from the other side. Russia also before buys Iranian oil and sell it again. So many actually proposals in both the two files, the file of oil and uranium, are on the table, quite sure.
Dr. Osman, President Trump suggested China could do more ahead of talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. So what leverage does Beijing have that could help bring this conflict to an end?
I think China, of course, is one of the countries that is being harmed, at least on the short and medium term, the most by this war due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And in the event that if this war resumes or Iran collapses or Iran loses this war and is sidelined as a regional power or the regime falls, for example, this will be a blow to Chinese influence in the region, indeed. So the Chinese understand that, and that's why they have a vested interest in attempting to push for a peaceful settlement and de-escalation in the region. And indeed, they did. They played a role in supporting the mediators, Pakistan, Egypt, and Turkey, in applying certain pressure on Iran to convince it to accept the ceasefire and engage positively in the negotiations. And the Iranians did indeed, at least in the first round, the first and only round of negotiations that took place in Islamabad about 3 weeks ago. Now, of course, China knows that it is being on the receiving end of harm in this quagmire, and the United States accuses China every now and then of providing support for Iran. They even seized the ship that was heading for Iranian ports, and they said that it contained components of dual usage that can be used in civilian industry or in military manufacturing as well, according at least to the Americans. And the Chinese denied that. However, there might be indications that China might be more willing to support Iran militarily even in the future if this conflict drags on, because basically it will be seen as, especially the blockade that the United States is imposing now, is depriving China of Iranian oil entirely. And China is already deprived of huge shares of the shares of the imports of Gulf oil imports from various Gulf countries. So basically, this will be seen by China as a hostile act by the United States. And I honestly, Hannah, I do not know how next month President Xi Jinping and President Trump will be able to meet and hold a summit while this crisis is still ongoing, because this crisis might be one of the main causes that this summit fails to deliver any meaningful outcomes that will push US-Chinese relations further and maintain the current lull in relations between them. And at the same time, also, Hala, Chinese influence over Iran is exaggerated. Just yesterday, a report came out that said the foreign minister of Thailand, contacted China and asked them to help them bring 8 of their ships out of the Arabian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz, and that the Chinese should speak to the Iranians to help them allow these ships to pass. Do you know what China said responding to them? It said that we have 70 of our own Chinese ships that we cannot convince the Iranians to
Are
let
unable to
through.
pass.
Exactly, and the Iranians would not let them through. So this shows the limitations of Chinese influence, really, and that the United States is exaggerating it and exaggerating the Chinese role. And China, by choice, is trying not to play a very prominent or get heavily involved in this conflict, because if it does, it will make it basically party to a proxy war against the United States, and this goes against the current core foundations of Chinese foreign policy. However, if the United States keeps the blockade and the energy crisis starts escalating or affecting the Chinese markets or the Chinese economy more severely, and Chinese economic growth as well, China might then be forced to alter course and be much more belligerent towards the United States and much more supportive of Iran if this crisis drags on, Hala.
Dr. Sheikh, now we're seeing renewed cross-border exchanges between Israel and Hezbollah despite the ceasefire. So how dangerous could this situation in Lebanon become?
Actually, we can't separate the situation in Lebanon from what's going on with Iran. I mean, it's from, at least from the Iranian point of view, and Hezbollah, it is one package. But the problem is that Israel, the one who usually restarted the attacks, simply because Israel has its own dream of great Israel, and it insists to have a quiet part of Lebanon until up to the Litani. So Israel is continue to achieve and to implement or taking concrete step, very dangerous step toward what it called a great Israel. And unfortunately, now it focused on Iran and on Hezbollah as umbrella to achieve or to take such steps. But I think Israel will not stop, because Netanyahu also in a very critical position. There are increasing opposition inside Israel against Netanyahu. The opposition is trying to rearrange itself to be able to challenge Netanyahu in upcoming elections. So he is really in a very dilemma and very critical situation. And the more he is feeling critically inside, he is trying to have some success or some achievement outside and abroad. So unfortunately, Lebanon is the one who is now a scene to such Netanyahu dreams or crimes, whatever we call it, and that will not unfortunately stop unless United States exercise a great pressure over Netanyahu to stick with the ceasefire.
Dr. Osman, now Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem is calling for a halt to talks with Israel. How could that threaten the already fragile ceasefire?
Of course, it complicates the situation. And can we really speak of a ceasefire in Lebanon? I really fail to comprehend the definition of what a ceasefire is, because what's going on in Lebanon right now is a low intensity war of some sort. It is not a ceasefire. It's not a complete cessation of hostilities. It's not even like the 2024, November 2024 ceasefire, which was basically largely one-sided and Israel violated it on a daily basis. This time there is an actual exchange of fire between Hezbollah and Israel, and the Israeli occupation is advancing inside Lebanese, southern Lebanon, uh, during a ceasefire, and is carrying out daily airstrikes and attacks and carrying out demolitions in the towns and cities and villages they control. And on the other hand, Hezbollah is resisting Israeli advances, targeting Israeli soldiers, and even launching rockets every now and then on targets in northern Israel. So I do not know how we can call this a ceasefire. Hala. It might be just a lower intensity stage of combat, basically. And at the same time, even this very flawed ceasefire is threatened by the ongoing situation. Of course, threatened primarily by Israel's incessant violations, non-stop violations on a daily basis that are causing havoc and destruction inside Lebanon and eroding whatever is left of its sovereignty on the southern area of the Litani. And also on the other hand, Hezbollah and how it is being intransigent and defies the will of the legitimate Lebanese government and president and prime minister by opposing these negotiations and trying to create realities on the ground that might obstruct these negotiations is basically as well a proponent or a factor that might lead to undermining the ceasefire. What's keeping this ceasefire in effect, Hala, is the United States, because the US wants that. However, the United States apparently is not ready to apply pressure on the Israelis so that they would honor their commitments under this ceasefire. And naturally, of course, since Israel is constantly violating the ceasefire and conducting military operations, Hezbollah responds by conducting its own military operations as well. This, of course, does not justify how Hezbollah is defying the Lebanese government and is attempting to block the negotiating track and the diplomatic process. And also at the same time, Hezbollah's entire decision-making and entire strategy is governed by Iranian interests and not Lebanese interests. So we cannot really exonerate neither Israel nor Iran from complicating the situation in Lebanon and furthering the conflict over there.
Yes. Dr. Sheikh, now with tensions rising in southern Lebanon, how critical is this front to the success of any future US-Iran talks?
I think it's a main challenge for the talks, because Iran connect directly the peace and ceasefire in Lebanon with the successful talks and negotiation with the United States. I'd say one of the terms, one of the conditions, Tehran put it at the top of any talks and any demands for it in the negotiation. So what is going on in Lebanon complicate more and more the talks, which is already complicated, and widen more and more the gap between Iran and the United States, and making peace more and more far from what it is already now. So I think this is one of the main challenges, and hopefully the Trump administration can pressure more and more on Israel to stop its attacks against Lebanon.
Dr. Osman, now Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz said that the US lacks a clear exit strategy on Iran. So is that view widely shared across Europe? And what does it say about confidence in Washington as a peacemaker?
Oh, it seems that this is shared not only by Europe, by basically the entire world, that the United States really does not have an exit strategy or a coherent off-ramp that can lead it to safely exit this war while saving face and achieving something of strategic significance. It seems that doubts are being raised about that. And Friedrich Merz took it even further and was very, very, I would say, blunt in his approach and his description of what's going on between the United States and Iran when he said that Iran is humiliating the United States by dragging the negotiators to Pakistan, US negotiators to Pakistan, and then not showing up and so on and so forth. So basically, he is saying that the United States is failing in this war. And coming from Germany, a country that was basically very mildly supportive of this war in its opening days, this really demonstrates how critical of an impasse the United States is in at this point, and that it really lacks any exit strategy. And at the same time, also on the other hand, since Europe is one to talk, they are not effective at all. They are not even on the negotiating table. No one is even paying attention to the Europeans or asking about what they could do to resolve this conflict. Do you know why, Hala? Because they have eroded all of their ability and their credibility that would have helped them play a significant role in that. Because Europe, the E3 especially, Germany, Britain, and
In
France,
France.
played a role in exacerbating the tensions and pushing us to this critical moment, Hala. They are the ones who activated the snapback mechanism, which led to the collapse of the Cairo Agreement between the IEEA and Iran. They
Yes.
are the ones who reimposed UN sanctions on Iran and led its economy basically to crumble, leading to the January protests, which was basically the main lead up to the current war, which was used as the primary pretext because we tend to forget that, Hala. And
Yes.
some of those countries, including Germany itself and Britain, at the opening phase of the war, were actually supportive of the US-Israeli war of aggression against Iran before backtracking when the economic ramifications became clear and that they would, and it became also clear that they will be on the receiving end
I
of
get
the
your point.
economic
Yes.
ramifications of this crisis.
Yes, I get your point. Thank you so much, Dr. Muhammad Osman, International Relations Specialist, and also Dr. Nurhan Sheikh, Professor of Political Science. Thank you both for joining us and for your very valuable discussions. Much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our special coverage for now. We'll keep a close eye on developments in this ongoing crisis. I'm Hala Al Hamalawi. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.